Good afternoon, everyone. As you're beginning to join, I'm going to put a few notes in the chat about how to change some functions on Zoom. If you don't already know how, it might be helpful. But just so you know, as I add this text, only people on the Zoom can see the text. So I might copy and paste it again as people join so that others can see the directions. Basically, what I'm providing information for is how to rename your Zoom name. It just allows people to add their name, especially if they are on a shared account, or to add their pronouns if they choose. The second thing that I'm about to post is an announcement that I will be indicating a spotlight on the speaker today. All that will do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, but the spotlight will allow all of the attendees to see our speaker, Lisa, on their screen. However, if you choose, you can also pin a person on your own if you choose to see a different person in your screen. For example, if you would like to view the interpreter and not the presenter, you can go to Cara, the interpreter's box, and select the 3 dots on the top right-hand corner and just select pin this person. And that will allow you to only view that person's box rather than the presenter. Feel free to message me if you have any questions. We'll get started in just a moment.
Teresa, if I may, when you spotlight me to speak, that's fine, but you want to spotlight Mary when she speaks as well. You need to go back and forth. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. I will do that. We'll give people another minute or so to join us.
And Teresa, do we have captioning turned on?
I can turn it on.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I have never used closed captioning on Zoom. I'm wondering if you can provide me any direction on how to do that most efficiently.
In order to set up captioning, it needs to be set up prior to the Zoom. If you did not set it up when you set up the link, it will not show up.
Okay. Well, then no.
I apologize.
Maybe we can do it for the other 2 sessions coming up.
You can do that through setting.
Okay. Okay. I am going to turn it over to Mrs. Ingrid Hendricks, who is going to moderate today's session. I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you all. And thank you again for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. Appreciate that. Very happy to have people here today, this afternoon. Looking forward to the presentation on disability culture. I'm very happy to have 3 experts with us today. We have Lisa McNiven, who is a disability specialist with New Mexico's Governor's Commission on Disability, where she's been for the past 15 years. She was born deaf due to maternal rubella. She obtained a BA degree in psychology from Gallaudet University and completed her master's of public administration from UNM. She's been a member of various boards and commissions ranging from the New Mexico School for the Deaf to the City of Albuquerque's ADA Council. She provides direct services to the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind communities for the past 11 years at the Community Outreach Program for the Deaf. In the past years, out of her passion to promote equality and understanding of the disability community, she's developed numerous trainings and projects on various topics and issues statewide, such as the ADA, medical access, emergency preparedness, employment perspectives, and disability awareness. Welcome, Lisa. And we're also pleased to have Dr. Mary Beresford with us today. She contracted polio at 2 and spent a year in a rehab hospital. She's been involved with physical and occupational therapy as well as many medical procedures and has been a wheelchair user for the past 35 years. She's been involved with the disability rights movement, both here in New Mexico and in Sacramento, California. She has a master's degree in psychology and a PhD in cultural studies with an emphasis on disability culture. And joining her today is Jessica Bowen. We're pleased to have her here representing the disability or the developmental disability community. So welcome to everyone, and thank you for being here today. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Ingrid, for the nice introduction. Good to be here today to talk about disability culture. I have here a sign language interpreter, Kara, who will be interpreting for me because I was worn down. And I didn't learn sign language until I was 18. And at that time, when I learned sign language, my world opened up and I learned a lot about culture, specifically deaf culture. But for the purpose of this presentation, we'll be talking about disability culture that encompasses deaf people as well. And I met Mary over 15 years ago when Mary and I talked about culture, and she spoke to me about disability culture. What does that mean? And when she did a presentation on that very topic, my light bulb went up and it said, this is deaf community. And she said, no, you are a part of the disability community. And I said, yes, let's talk more about disability culture. I think the importance of this is revealing because it shows that all cultures are important, and including your own culture that you are part of, whether Hispanic, Navajo, German, Polish, whatnot. Culture is important, including the disability community. Mary, would you like to mention some more before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, when I first met Lisa, it was really interesting because I talked about disability culture from the perspective of what I had gained over my many years of disability. And Lisa came up to me and said, what? That's the deaf culture. And I said, well, you know, coming from California, we had a very strong disability community from a cultural perspective. And I had been working on my doctorate degree in cultural studies with an emphasis in disability. So when I came to meet with and first met Lisa, it was like, whoa, somebody really understands our culture. And Lisa kept saying deaf culture. And I said, it's all our culture, but there's definitely different components. My granddaughter, Jessica, who is here, is part of the developmental disability community and culture. So we have a huge disability culture with a lot of different components in it. The deaf community definitely had the strongest perspectives on the cultural perspectives and disability.
Yeah. So throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. And if it's pertinent to the slide that we're discussing, we will address them. Otherwise, we will address all of your questions at the end of the session if there's time. So we're going to talk about what is disability. The Americans with Disability Act had provided a definition, but there's also a definition that's personal, and also the community is trying to define themselves as what it means to be part of a disability community. But For the purpose of this slide, we'll talk about what the American Disability Act definition is of what is disability. It defines a person with physical or mental impairment that substantially limit one or major life activity. And for myself as a deaf person, one major life activity that substantially limited my inability to hear on the phone. So the ADA protects my right to be able to have access to the phone. And that Title IV, in which it covers access to the use of the phone. And this also pertains to other individuals with disabilities, one or more major life activities that are affected. They are protected under the ADA. And then also, if you have such a record of such an impairment, even if you don't have a disability today, if you had a disability in the past and you have a record of it, you are protected under the ADA. You can also be regarded as a person with a disability, such as even if you don't have a major life activity that limits you, such as burn disfigurement or a birth defect, you are protected under the ADA. You are also protected if you are associated with a person with a disability, such as the parent of a child, and if you are married to a person with a disability, you are yourself protected under the ADA. I myself am a parent. I have a son with ADHD, and he is someone that I always request a sign language interpreter in order to address his IEP when we have meetings. And this is important for all individuals to understand the definition of the ADA, what is a disability. And it includes, in the past 2010, it also includes the protection of individuals in terms of their bodily function. And their bodily function could be their immune system, digestive, neurological, bowel, bladder, respiratory, circulatory, and more. They've added this only if it affects their major life activity, even if it's episodic or in remission. It's covered, you can substantially limit a major life activity. What's not included, do you wear contact lenses or glasses? Mary, would you like to add more about this?
I think one of the key important things in this, and Lisa and I have talked about this before, is that I know I've had people tell me, oh, everybody has a disability of some kind. The important thing is that it substantially limits one or more of your major activities. If you just have a minor hearing loss, that's not a disability. If you have minor issues that does not substantially limit, then it's not a disability. It's not covered under the ADA as a disability.
And I also would like to mention that what is a disability myself personally, for myself to define myself. Growing up, I was called hard of hearing because I can hear some with my hearing aid, but on paper, I'm actually profoundly deaf. And with my hearing aid, however, it brings me up to be able to hear speech to some degree. The definition is personal, and the definition is legal. The definition is cultural. So definition is changing. It changed from the past to the present to the future. It may change in the future again. Who knows what the disability community will come up with. But right now, disability is the term that the community had agreed to define ourselves as an umbrella term. And the deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, and under that umbrella term, including the development disability community, including the blind and visually impaired, and more. All of us are part of the disability community. And who are the disability community here in New Mexico? What we have here is a statistic that's provided by the American Community Survey, written by Cornell University, based on the census that occurs every 10 years. Right now in 2018, what they have come up with for New Mexico, we have 2,070,100 individuals with and without disability. But of that, those individuals with disabilities, that's 320,200 individuals. And of that, between ages 5 to 17, 18,500 children have disabilities here in New Mexico who will one day grow up to be adults. And in this pie that you see here in the right, all disability prevalence rate is at 15.6% in New Mexico, with the U.S. national average at 10.4%. Our average is higher than the national average, and statistics said they aren't sure why. We're still investigating in terms of maybe some individuals have dual diagnosis. That's why the percentage may be higher. You can see here, independent living is at 6.9%. And that indicates individuals who need support to live independently in the community. And then we have self-care at 2.9%. That means maybe an individual needs help to have self-care at home and to be able to dress, eat, bathe, and more. And then ambulatory and those with physical disability, 8.5%. And cognitive disability, including developmental disability, those with autism, including brain injuries, at 6.1%. And then vision loss, which means blind and visually impaired, is at 3%. Hearing means deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind who are culturally deaf, meaning that they use American Sign Language at 5.1%. So this statistic is important to have that knowledge so you know who you are serving individuals with disability in the state. Mary, would you like to add more to this?
No, I think you covered that pretty well. Again, I've heard the reasons for why New Mexico may have a higher rate of disability is due to the higher rate of poverty that we have within this state.
That could be one reason, yes. And a very good point. Thank you for adding that. I'm going to go to the next slide. So what we have here, difference between disability and handicap. A handicap is a physical or attitudinal constraint that is imposed upon a person regardless of whether that person has a disability or not. But let's look at the term a little bit further, disability and handicap. Disability is a term that the community has agreed to adopt and to use. Handicap, however, is not something that's readily acceptable in our community. Handicap came from the story way back when individuals with disability went looking for work and couldn't find work because there was a lot of stereotype prejudice and discrimination against people with disability to hire them. So handicap came about when people with disability would have to beg out in the street to survive. They would take their hand in cap and people would put money in their tap and hint that they became handicapped. And that term is a view that negative that people with disabilities do not want. But we also want to look at examples of what are handicaps in our community. And I like the example that Mary had provided the other day. Could you mention that story that you provided, Mary?
Sure. As a person in a power wheelchair, I have an adaptive van with a ramp on it. So I have to have accessible parking spaces. But when I pull into a space and it says handicapped parking, my first thought is, I don't need a parking space that has a handicap. I need a fully accessible parking space. I've gone to the city council meetings here a couple of different times and asked them if they can change the wording on that, just either disability parking or just with the international symbol of disability and parking. But a lot of people confuse the handicap and disability. A handicap is something that's external. It happens to you. A disability is what you have. So when they call me handicapped, they're placing the responsibility of access on me rather than the responsibility on society instead. So I have a disability, society is handicapped, is handicapping.
I agree with you, Mary. It's much like when I go to an event, and I go to an event every year, like the Martin Luther King celebration they do in January. They know me by now because I'm always asking for a sign language interpreter, right? And so you would think that a year that I forget to provide access for myself by calling in to request it, they will already have that arranged. Because it's not just for me, it's for the entire community behind me who are interested in attending local events. And when an interpreter is not present, it makes us feel separate. So society is handicapping us from participating in facilities and events and services. So on the right, as you can see here, this could happen to you at any time, being a person with a disability. For myself, I was born deaf. For Mary, she became disabled as a young child. For other individuals, they can become disabled later in life. Disability can be temporary or permanent. You can break a bone, but it heals. But if you have a hearing loss through a disease, it may not come back. They haven't figured out how to regenerate nerve yet. So illness can change disability. Think about Parkinson. Think about MS. Think about other types of disease that a medical community works with often. Individuals who have an illness don't necessarily want to be a person with a disability because they are used to who they are, a person without a disability up until that point. When they become disabled, it takes a lot of time to adjust, to accept, to have that identity. So for Mary and I, we grew up with our disability. We had an acceptance of ourselves from the get-go. We didn't know anything different. And disability can be either visible or invisible. You can't tell if I'm deaf unless I tell you. You can't see my hearing aid. You can't, maybe you can hear some of my speech impediment and can't really tell what that's coming from. I mean, it took me years of speech therapy to speak how I speak today. Illness can go away, but a disability can remain. Think of my mother who had maternal rubella. She was pregnant with me. A disability remained, but she got better. So this can happen to you at any time. Think about the disability community. It had individuals that grew up with their disability, had individuals who became disabled later in life. Does having a disability mean that you have a culture? Mary, would you like to add more? Think about that.
Sure. I just had a thought that just kind of whizzed right through like a bird flying through a tree. Let me see if I can't retrieve it back again. But people like Lisa and I, who have grown up with disability, basically, I don't know how to not be disabled because I've never not been disabled since I was 2 years old. So I've never ran, hopped, skipped, or jumped. I don't know how to do that. So it's part of my life. I didn't learn how to accept that until many, many years later. Those of us with disabilities are not born into families who have disabilities. We learn our culture from our peers. We'll get into that a little bit later on too. But for someone like, I have had people, and I'm sure Lisa has had people say this too, wouldn't it be great if they could come up with a magic pill and tomorrow you could walk? And I'd say, no, I don't know how to interact with society as a walking person. I know how to interact with society as a person in a wheelchair. So don't take that away from me and assume that I would like to have a magic pill and walk. If they came up with a magic pill, I'd say, no, thank you.
Yeah, that magic pill also means that the disability community has come up with changes in technology. And you heard of cochlear implant. Cochlear implant was it's not new. It's been around for 20 years or more. But when it started being used in our community, it changed our perspective. Are we still deaf? We have a cochlear implant. So that concept of change through technology also reassesses our community. What does it mean to be a part of the disability community, a deaf community, or the cognitive disability community, and the blind community when technology interfaces with our person? So does the disability have a culture? Let's talk about culture a little bit. Culture refers to a minority group in which people share common experience and an additional challenge in their interaction with society, but also have produced culture that have been positive for everyone. I can tell you that the deaf community has produced culture for the wider community to use. How many of you watch football and you see the huddle happen when they talk about their play, what their next step they will do? Where do you think that came from? It came from the deaf community because deaf people who are football players have to sign to each other in secret so that the other team who knows sign language don't see them from a distance. So they have to huddle to hide their language in order for the other team don't see their play. So the hearing community liked that so much, decided to adopt it. In football game, you see that huddle, think about the deaf community. How is culture transmitted? Mostly from our family. But if you are disabled, it transmitted through your peers. It's true. I myself was born in a family that had no one who had a hearing loss. However, I grew up with an aunt and an uncle who were blind, and I grew up with an uncle who had polio. So I had some cultural awareness of people with disabilities, but I didn't have cultural awareness of the deaf community. How did I know about that? Is when I went to Gallaudet University, the only liberal arts university in the world for the deaf in Washington, D.C. When I entered that world, my world opened up based on the language that is used, because the vehicle of culture reflects worldview. And the ASL was adopted from France, not England. You would think that because we speak the same language, English to English, we would learn sign language from England. But England said that it was top secret information. They refused to share their English sign language with us. So we went to France to learn their sign language. So their language is part of our language now. So 99% is observation of our culture and 1% is taught. 1% that taught is not taught through families, but our peers. Mary, would you like to add anything else to this topic?
I had a similar experience to Lisa there. Growing up, I was the only one in my home that had a disability, the only one in my neighborhood with a disability, and the only one in school with a disability. So I was always on the outside looking in and never really felt I belonged in any particular group. I was just an observer in life. I started college at age 30, a little bit of a late bloomer in there. But once I did, I got involved with the independent living movement. And I finally, for the first time, felt that I belonged somewhere. I met a lot of other people with disabilities. I even started playing wheelchair tournament tennis. I started riding a hand cycle bike. I started doing a lot of things and hanging out with a lot of other people with disabilities. And the first time in my life that I felt that I actually belonged anywhere and that I was okay was when I finally met a lot of other people. So I didn't learn through observation through all of my early years and even up until 30. It wasn't until I got into college and met other folks, and having a disability was no big deal. Being in a wheelchair was no big deal. It was like, so, we move on. And that's what culture is. It's just a way of life. That's what I learned in college, was how to treat my disability and being in a wheelchair as just a difference. It's not a deficit. It's just a difference.
Yeah, disability community, the deaf community enhances your life. So when I went to Gallaudet University, I learned about the cultural ways of doing things, such as when you get someone's attention, there are specific ways of doing that. That's culturally supportive and it's culturally mandated. Like, for example, if you were to get someone's attention in a classroom setting, all people were deaf, and the teacher up front wanted to get your attention, it's hard to do. So they go to a light switch, they flick the light switch. How many times do you think the rule is? It's not 5 times, it's not once, it is twice. You flick it twice and people will look up. If you do more than that, it is rude. So there are rules within a community that you learn. And the cultural relevance based on the disability that you have. What do people with disability experience in their culture? The experience of a person with a disability could be either negative or positive. And negative and prevalent in all persons with disability in their life. They grow up with discrimination, prejudice, and stereotype. That's a given. It could be mild, it could be extensive. But what's not as often that happens in positive experiences, disability identity through politics and activism, and communal attachment. You can see here the top picture here called Deaf President Now. I was involved in the Deaf President movement in the late 1980s. In college, we were protesting about having the fact that a deaf president who was qualified was not chosen to be our next president. After 125 years of hearing president running our university, the chairman of the board said that deaf people wasn't ready to rule themselves. So that upset us so much that we decided to protest. We closed down the campus And we walked down to the Capitol Brown House to protest and said, we want a deaf president now. The police came to us and said, you need a permit to protest, to walk down the street. We said, we can't hear you. We moved on. So they didn't provide a sign language interpreter to communicate with us. So we demanded our rights now. And we met our right after that week with 4 demands: deaf president and a deaf chairman of the board, 51% of the deaf on the board, and no reprisal for the student for not showing up in class. And that empowered the community to say, we can do anything but here. And then down below is the affirmation of disability and personal meaning about the disability community you belong to. I think that's important for all people with disability to have that affirmation and have that communal attachment, to have a personal meaning about what it means to be a person with a disability. Mary?
Along that same line is, I think one thing that, I know one thing that most people with disabilities want is just to be treated like everybody else without being special. Like in the bottom little cartoon there, it shows where, isn't he brave? Oh, he's so courageous. Aren't they special? When I used to play tennis, I would have people who were walking saying, gosh, how do you do that? I don't even play tennis and I walk. And I said, what does walking have to do with tennis? I just told you I play with like 200 other people and we're all in wheelchairs. Well, tennis has nothing to do with walking unless you walk. And then it has something to do with it at that point. And discrimination and prejudice also comes in little things like, and I'm sure Lisa's had these experiences, just not long ago, I was coming out of a store, I put my jacket on, and this lady came up and said, oh, you did such a good job. And I said, what? I just put my jacket on. Yeah, but you did that so well. Like, I'm not a 5-year-old child. You know, I've got a PhD degree. I'm a retired college professor. I was a state agency director, but still people want to treat me often like that's special. Isn't that wonderful that you were able to put a jacket on all by yourself? And that's just one example of many. I could spend a whole day telling you many, many, many stories of how those kind of things affect you. And it's very difficult when you have an obvious significant disability to maintain your level of self-confidence and self-esteem, because people are always wanting to treat you like a child or like an anomaly of something that should be over there.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, very true. That negative experience that people have, it builds up inside themselves. And what do you do with it? How do you handle it? It's good to be part of a community that shared the same experience, and we can talk about it and relieve that stress, and then make fun of it or laugh about it and make jokes about it. Me and Mary can talk about it and just have some fun stories about it, and we can laugh about it and then relieve stress to do so. A person with a disability who become disabled later in life needs that. They need peers to help them deal with life's difficulties. Mary?
Lisa, very quickly, why don't you tell them the story of when you and Larry Lorenzo, who's blind, and I were having lunch?
Yes, yeah. That story is long time ago, about 14, 15 years ago, me, Mary, and Larry had blind. We did a co-presentation together, or attended a meeting in a local community down south of New Mexico. We went to a restaurant for lunch. So we went to the restaurant. The restaurant could see Mary being physically disabled, could see Larry being blind when he had a cane. So we all sat down and had lunch, and we ordered, and I depended on my colleague Mary and Larry to tell me what the waitress is saying, so that I could order my meal. So after the meal was over, Mary and Larry paid their meal, they left. The waitress came up to me and said, oh, you did a good job. You helped them. That's very nice of you to help Mary and Larry in their role here, the person with a disability. And I said, but I'm the one who depended on them. I'm deaf. I couldn't understand you. and we laughed. But during that lunch hour, one other thing that happened, that Larry heard a song, music over the restaurant that I don't pay attention to. Of course, I don't understand it. And he was singing without his voice. He was saying, I love you. He was just singing what it was saying. And I said, you love me? And he said, no, I don't love you. I'm just singing. And so we can talk about things like that. It's so funny.
So we had a really good laugh at that. We laughed and laughed and laughed during that lunchtime, sharing our experiences from a deaf perspective, a blind perspective, and a mobility impaired perspective, because we all understood what the other person was saying, going through.
Yeah. And to your right, you can see here, society and interaction to a person with a disability. What type of interaction do we have? People without disability, people with disability. This source is from Dunn, 2013. He studied this. And he stated that there are 4 types of interaction that individuals with disabilities have experienced, people without disability. Social exclusion, whether intentionally or unintentionally, in that people are excluded from event, from the facility, from services. And social exclusion happens every day, one way or another. And financial constraint, what's real about that is that people don't plan a budget in advance. And the ADA understandable that people don't plan ahead because they don't think that the ADA doesn't come with a budget. I understand that. But when you have financial constraint, it puts a barrier for people with disability to participate. So plan early, plan often, include people with disability, and try to come up with a plan, one small thing at a time. And the inclusion will grow. The opportunities will grow. More participation from the disability community will happen. And then medical causation is when society thinks that a person with a disability that needs to be thick, that we need to be better, do more, to become like a person without a disability. And then social causation is, of course, that when you have a society that impedes you from being able to enter a facility, that social causes, that causes us to be handicapped in not being involved. Mary, would you like to add more to this?
Yeah, being a wheelchair user, I depend a lot on the ADA and facilities being accessible. And even though we're 30 years out of the ADA, there are still many places where I go and I can't use the restroom. I can't get in because there's no ramp or whatever. And I bring it up to the owner of the facility and say, it's with the ADA, you need to be accessible. And they say, oh, they consider it a building code. And they say, oh, we've been grandfathered in. I said, no, the ADA is not a building code. The ADA is a civil rights law. So you can't be grandfathered in on a civil rights law. Lisa came up with a great response. Should say, gee, you don't look like a grandfather, when they tell me they've been grandfathered in.
I like that retort, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to use it.
Yeah. So this slide is what is most important to all people with disability. What is the one thing that they all have in common? The physical disabled community, the blind and visually impaired, the deaf and hard of hearing, developmental or cognitive disability, autistic, and mental health. I'll just put a comment in the chat and we will review it, but I will provide the answers momentarily. And there's a clue on this slide. If you look to the right, you see that it's important. What we want you to be aware of is how accessible is your facility? How accessible is your service to people with disabilities? Do you have an accessible restroom? Do you know where it is? Do you have a TTY? Do you know where it is? Do you know how to get a sign language interpreter? Do you have a handbook on that? Do you know how to do text to braille or text to large print? Do you know what size font you need? Do you have this information? This is what's important. What is most important to all people with disability is access. Access to your facility, to your services, to your materials, to the information that you provide. We need information that's in plain language for the development and disability community. They need this in order to obtain information as well. If you do not have an accessible process for them to obtain information or to go to the restroom, or to make a phone call, what in an alternative idea that you could provide? What in an alternative way you can offer a person to use? Where is a restroom that they can go to? If they can't go to the second floor, where they're in an accessible restroom. If you don't have one on the first floor and there's no elevator, where can you go? You need to figure out about next door, a place across the street, and you can tell that information to a person with a disability. Mary, would you like to add anything else here?
I used to do a lot of ADA compliance work when I was in Sacramento. And one thing I would tell people is that signs are your best friends. Put a sign up. Where's the restroom? Where's the ramp? Where are the services that are needed so that people know where to go and how to access those services?
Yeah, absolutely. So American with Disabilities Act has been around for 30 years. And because the ADA was designed for people with disabilities, it now is being used by people without disability. So then consequently, it is called universal design. So when you talk about a design that you want to do for the community, you want to be inclusive, people with disability, people without disability. But you can see in the picture down the bottom PowerPoint that people without disabilities have used them all. Automatic doors, it's like God said, you have packages in your arm, a ramp. How many of you choose the ramp over step? How many of you have chosen a larger turnstile in a bathroom? How many of you prefer captioning in a noisy bar? How many of you use all these things? Mary?
Oh, absolutely. Universal design. You know, ramps are not just for people in wheelchairs. They're for a family member with a child in a stroller. Somebody who just feels safer going up a ramp rather than up steps. So these are all universal things that they're not just specifically for one group of people, but they're meant to make all of our lives easier.
Yeah. So when you have a universal design for all of us, it's inclusive for people with disabilities as well.
One other quick thing there, Lisa. One thing that the ADA has allowed us to do, the best thing I've ever heard, is that the ADA allows us to boldly go where everyone else has gone before. Those of us with disabilities never get to assume there's going to be access. You don't get to assume there's going to be an interpreter, assume that there's going to be a ramp or an accessible bathroom. But anyway, I think that's just the best thing I've ever heard of the ADA, to boldly go where everyone else has already gone.
I love Star Trek. Thank you for mentioning that quote. Here in Awkward No More is a video, less than 3 minutes. It talks about how to interact with people with disability and not having to feel awkward. In this video, you're allowed to laugh. There's some funny moments here. We have to have humor in our world.
Yes, yeah. This is funny.
Good morning, Bob.
Morning there, big man. Morning, Alice!
There's no need to be awkward.
Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention! Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, ah! Oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
What?
Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't underestimate me just because I have a great smile.
Just because I'm blind.
May I help you?
Does not mean I'm deaf.
Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath. Relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi, would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alice.
Morning.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
And it's a good thing that Bob not awkward anymore, right? And the whole intent is to get to know the community and to know us. You need to be involved. You need to interact. You need to attend our events in the community. You need to include us in your events as well. Mary?
Yeah, one thing, in the way people are being treated and not. I've shared this story with Lisa a couple of times. I used to be the director of a state agency, so I was in a meeting with the governor, Bill Richardson, at the time. And in this meeting, he reached over and patted me on the head. A little awkward, like really awkward. I've had that happen a couple of times, and when it's happened, I reach around and I pat the person who patted me on the head on their butt. And they look at me in shock, and I say, well, if you can pat me on the head, I can pat you on the butt. I did not pat Governor Richardson on the butt, though. I just looked at him like, please don't do that.
Yeah, and awkward. When I went to an aquarium, I told this story to Mary. When I went to an aquarium, you remember that movie called Free Willy? And Willie knows sign language. They were teaching him sign language to be able to do tricks. Well, Willie was at this aquarium, a real aquarium in Oregon. There was the tour guide explaining about the place. And I was so excited to see Willie. I couldn't understand the tour guide because there was no sign language interpreter. So I was more interested in communicating with Willie. So I was signing to Willie. I was just looking at Willie, and the tour guide was right over to my side. And of course, I didn't hear the tour guide saying, Miss, you need to stop signing to Willie. And I didn't hear anything. So I was signing away to Willie. And there was someone standing right beside me who stood right in front of me and took her hand full face to my head and forcefully moved my head to look at the tour guide. I was so astounded that she did that. And the tour guide said, please do not sign to Willie because Willie will expect a treat. If there's no treat, he will be upset. And I said, oh, okay. So I stopped signing to Willie. And then I looked at the person that touched me that way. I said, don't you ever touch me that way again. If you need my attention, the proper way to do it is to tap me on the shoulder. I wouldn't. Stunned. I'm an adult. You don't do that to me that way. So anyway, so that's what happened. That's what awkward happened on a frequent basis.
Yeah.
So this is the last slide. The culture like in each of the communities. the physical disability community, the deaf and hard of hearing, deaf blind community, the cognitive disability community, the blind and visually impaired community, and the mental health disability community. So each of these communities have experienced culture. And these different cultures interact with each other under the umbrella of disability. So I wanted to ask Jessica if she would like to talk about the cognitive disability community that she belonged to. What does culture mean to her? Jessica?
What is the developmental disability community mean to you when you go to Adelante and you meet with your friends? What does that mean to you? Your culture of hanging out with your buddies,
it
having a good
feels
time.
good to be with my friends and people that are like me and not people that don't have disabilities, because I belong in the group with people with disabilities.
And you feel like you belong somewhere?
Yes,
Yeah.
I feel like I belong with those people. And the staff treat me with respect, and they know my disability, and they know how to interact with me.
Good. Good.
Thank you, Jessica. Good to have you here to share about your community. Mary, would you like to talk more about your culture? You have something else to add?
No.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, going to Jessica's groups of other folks within her developmental disability community gives her a lot of self-esteem and feeling of self-importance, because you just treated, and one thing she commented on, which is so, so important, is that she's treated with respect. And that's a key thing I think all of us with disabilities want, is don't treat me special. I'm not a hero because I'm in a wheelchair. We're not a special. In fact, I've done a couple of presentations with schools in special ed, and my first question is, what's so special about education for children with disabilities? They call our equipment special equipment. It's not special equipment. My wheelchair is a necessity. It would be like calling your legs special equipment because you can walk. It's just a part of who you are. So the whole cultural thing is just treat me as an individual, treat me with the same respect that you would anybody else. Do not treat me like a 5-year-old child. That happens very, very often. Or don't treat me like I'm some kind of an anomaly and you've never seen me before, or anyone like me.
I would like to mention about the blind community. Larry, our friend, had mentioned some story that culturally relevant, is that how do you tell which restroom to go to if there's no braille on it? How do you know which one to go? Which one in the men's room? Which one in the women's room? He said he uses the sense of smell. If he smells perfume, must be the women's restroom. So he goes to find the other one. I found that very intriguing, that the blind community use opportunity to help them figure out their world around them that they can't see.
Right.
That's part of his culture. And
right. Yeah, part of the disability culture is learning how to adapt, because we have to all be adapting in different places and different things to make things as accessible or usable as possible. And every community has different ways of adapting what they do. The blind will use the smell. The deaf might use the sight. For someone like me, I look a lot at spaces. Can I get my wheelchair through that? Where somebody might not think that I can get through. I know I can or can't just because I've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. So we've all made these adaptations in order to get through. And like Lisa said one time, we have to maintain a sense of humor. If you don't, you're going to get crushed under all of the lack of excess and attitudes that you're confronted with.
And one of the things in the deaf community that I've learned, I wasn't always in the deaf community. Growing up, I had no idea that there was the community, that there was the culture. When I went to Gallaudet University, however, I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned was that when you introduce each other, a deaf person to a deaf person, when you introduce each other, it is necessary to talk about what school for the deaf you came from. I never went to the school for the deaf, and I always say I didn't go to the school for the deaf, but they would mention what school that they came from. And it's culturally relevant to mention what school you came from in order to figure out the 7 degrees of connection between the community. It's that small. We know of someone that knows someone that knows someone. The mental health community, what I know about their community is that they have a high value toward reducing stigma. Reducing stigma involves wanting the community without disability to help. To reduce stigma provides opportunities for housing, employment, transportation, and more. If anybody have any questions, we'd be happy to listen to them. Now would be the time to address anything about the culturally relevant for each of these communities. Mary, do you have anything else to add while we're waiting?
Yeah, I do. One quick thing is that not everybody with a disability associates with a disability community, particularly people who have invisible disabilities. They often do what we call passing in order to get through life. They feel easier, so they don't associate with the community. Most people who associate with a disability community have an obvious disability, and they can't deny that they have a disability. In doing some of my research, I found that the people with the highest self-esteem were people with in the disability communities were those who had an obvious significant disability, because you can't deny, oh no, I don't have a disability, I'm fine. The people who had the most difficulty in getting through the environment and through life were those who have a disability, mental health, cognitive, whatever, but it's not an obvious disability, so they try to pass, and they're looked at as being lazy, not innovative, don't want to do anything. So I've actually been told that I'm really lucky that my legs don't work because I can't deny the fact that I have a disability, whereas somebody with a mental health or with some other kind of disability internal that may cause them to, like multiple sclerosis or something, if it's not significant.
Thank you all so much for this presentation. We're at time. We did have a couple of questions in the chat. One was asking about websites or resources for people to help them improve accessibility. And the other, someone was asking about the overlap of chronic pain in the disability community. For example, is it common for those with chronic pain to identify with the disability community? And then looks like a lot of people are going to need to sign off because, like I said, we're a little bit over time.
I will send the resource to you, and you'll receive it in email.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay. Mary, do you have anything to add to that question?
Nope, we're over time. I think we're good.
Thank you all so much for your time today. We really appreciate this. This was some great information to share with the community. And we'll look forward to hearing from you all again and getting some resources. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And here's our contact information. Thank you for the opportunity to present this information to you.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you again. Thank you again, Ingrid, Lisa, Mary, Cara, for just starting us off for Disability Heritage Month. I think the planning committee has done an excellent job to bring this forward between the Office of DEI, HSC, as well as UNM hospitals and the community of New Mexico. So thank you so much for teaching us, and we hope to continue to learn from all of you.
Yes, this is absolutely really just so wonderful and so well attended, and just very much appreciate this again, and Dr. Sanchez as well, and the planning committee, just really appreciate it. And I think we're going to get lots of questions and some, be able to continue having great information and education. So thank you again on behalf of the Health Sciences Center Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the hospital. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am going
I'm
to-
sorry, I'm Val Romero Leggett. I'm sorry, I didn't even introduce myself to you all, but the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Health Sciences Center and a Family Practice Doc. So nice to meet you all, and thank you.
Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Teresa.
Thank
Ingrid,
you.
I'm
I'm going to stop the recording. I just wanted to say thank you. I loved your presentation and your spirit and laughter. So it was, I learned a lot, but also was enjoyable. So I'm going to stop recording and allow any other questions.